Alright, a real classic here, Civilization. My poor box is not in great shape. I haven't set up my Egyptians yet. Okay, so this is a game that everybody I have ever introduced it to liked it, except for one person. That's not saying that everybody I've ever met who's seen it has liked it, but I've introduced it to a lot of people over the years, not many in the last 15 or 20. In fact, probably no one knew that I've introduced it to in that time. Anyway, it has some really clean designs in it, and in a lot of ways I kind of, once I started seeing the heavier type of Euros that became popular as Euros became popular, I started thinking of this as the proto-Euro. Now, I've come to understand that there was a different Euro movement that's just totally divorced in a lot of ways from the kinds of games that the real sort of hardcore Eurogamer plays. This game would fit in with that hardcore Eurogamer. It doesn't fit in with somebody who's playing, say, Damfros or, I don't know, Carcassonne or something along those lines. The one thing that this doesn't match with most Euros is it tends to be a longer game, but what it also happens to have is a couple of shorter games in it. So even if you seldom have time for the, and I estimated at about 1 hour per player, to play the full game, there are a couple kind of interesting little small games that one can play that take about a half hour each. Alright. And they are kind of interesting, actually. Let's, although maybe not brain burners, and this certainly isn't. Let's take a look at how this game works. First of all, this is, let's not quite take a look yet. This is sort of the prototypical Civilization game. There were some very light wargame-ish type games that tried to cover the birth of Civilization before this. They never really took off very big. This thing just was massively popular, reaching, you know, not so well in the wargaming community, but into the role-playing community and, you know, outside what was really even the gaming world in some ways. Alright, and one thing to note, it predates the computer game. In fact, not too much before I got this, I was typing in the closest thing to this that I seen on a computer, the old text game Hammurabi. Yeah, typing it in. This was in the day when, you know, most people didn't have a way to get communications electronically. And, you know, you pick up a creative computing, you got a couple, maybe 4 or 5 pages of code to type in, bang. In my case, you had to make, you know, some exceptions because you only had 2 string variables, but whatever. Alright, on to the game itself. So, the game actually has this simple sequence of play, and it's spelled out on these player aid cards. Let's take a look at what it's about, though. It's basically a horse race. You've got these different powers, or countries, or players, who are trying to advance along this line of boxes to get to this colored finish line. Whee! And there are certain things that will hinder you along the way. These different eras where the color changes are where things change, and then these numbers here are certain other requirements that you have to meet. In general, you go forward unless you're at one of those barriers. There's some exceptions to that. You can be hit hard enough that you actually fall back. Alright, well, so setting up the game, and I haven't finished setting up yet, but setting up the game, each person is dealt one of these cards. And I've placed these, and I'll discuss them later in the actual playthrough more, but I'm keeping them here to indicate what my choices were. So the first player picked the dark blue Assyria power. There are some choices here that are not good. And again, I'll try to hit that during the beginning of the playthrough. Okay, so at the beginning of the game, you're going to start with one of your little tokens along an edge where you have your color. So the Assyrians would, for example, be able to start in one of these two spaces. Everybody's got at least two choices except for poor Thrace, and somebody picked Thrace. Again, I'll try to hold off and go into that during the playthrough. Okay. So, I kind of wish I had my Egyptians here in front of me instead, because they're easier to show. I'll use these Babylonians. It's just a long reach over to Asia. Okay. So the first thing you do in your turn is you collect taxation, and they give conditions for each of these things. So in the case of taxation, the base thing is 2 of your stock, if you have them, get converted over into little treasury markers. Now, I remember there being, it's been a long time since I played. Yes, if you don't have enough stock to move stock to treasury, your cities will revolt and they'll go to another player. So you always want to make sure you have stock to cover your cities. Now there's an advance later on, somewhere, coinage, which allows you to modify the amount of taxation you collect per city. Normally it's 2 per city. With that you can switch it between 1 and 3. Alright, the next thing you do is population expansion. Yeah, I don't want to reach all the way over there. Alright, we'll use these Cretans. So when you start the game, you have 1 guy on the board. Each place where you have 1 guy on the board, you get a guy. Each place where you have 2 or more guys on the board at the beginning of the turn, you get 2 new guys. That's limited by your stock again, and some of the pieces are over sitting in here because in a 7-player game you don't use all the pieces. There's 9 different powers in the game, but the original rules suggest not using more than actually, and they give you mats only. They suggest not using more than 7. I've played it in 8 and 9 players. 9 players is almost, it's just too ugly. 8 players this board actually handles. With the Western expansion board, you can actually squeeze 9th player in there. It may have some balance issues though in doing so, because there's at least 2 players where you don't want the pair. So for example here, Thrace and Illyria and Italy. You don't want all 3 of them in the game at the same time. And Asia and Assyria, well, nobody should ever be Asia. But I've played games where they're both in the game and it's kind of ugly, but Assyria just wins that conflict. And likewise here, actually, Thrace has a real problem if Illyria's in the game. But again, okay. So after you, we kind of call this doubling because for the most part you've spread out so that you do double, especially early in the game. Then you count how many pieces you have on the board and you track them with these little markers here, which you just put on the space. However many dudes you have out there, well, that's how much you have there. And that's important because your census determines your order of movement. Most things are done in something called AST, Archaeological Succession Table, order, which means the guy at the top goes first, and the further down you are, the more advantages you have. This is why Assyria is better than Asia in a lot of ways. They win all, essentially, actions against the Asians just because they get to choose later. Now that's assuming everything's equal. If the census switches things, the movement order gets screwed up there. Okay, then you're allowed to construct ships. Now you have 2 ways you can construct ships. You can construct them out of treasury, or you can construct them out of people on the board. Essentially you spend 2, and I think you're allowed to combine them, people or treasury, and you can put a boat. The people have to come from where the boat comes from, so you don't want to do this on the first turn or, oh look, you're kind of out of the game. Okay. But somebody like the Cretans has to build boats eventually. You can notice they have an interesting little situation. They're surrounded by water, and that's what boats are good for, traveling over water. I shouldn't have to point that out, right? Okay, then you do movement. Movement's very simple except for naval movement. Regular movement is you may move into an adjacent area, as long as it's not a water boundary. Sea movement's a little different. A boat can haul up to 5 dudes 4 spaces. So, and you can drop off on your way. So let's say I pick up here 1, 2, oh, that looks like a good island. 2, 3, 4, and now I can land here. I've got to make my way to land. In general, you can't go through these major sea areas. There are some modifiers to this though too. Cloth making allows ships to move a 5th space, and astronomy allows ships to move over an open sea area in their movement. I think they're only allowed 1. I'd have to look that up. Usually that's sufficient, but you can't go striking across unless you can go over more than 1. So I'm not sure. It's been a long, long time. Anyway, not too important. Okay, conflict in this game is very simple. If you happen, after everybody's moved, so each player does each of these before you move on to the next one. Okay, so movement is the one weird thing because it's going to be done in census order, and I believe ties are broken in AST order, which means if Assyria and Asia have the same number of troops, which they should at the beginning of the game, if they don't, somebody screwed up probably, then Assyria gets to move after Asia, which means they can position their troops to take advantage of the combat system. The combat system is absolutely diceless. It's deterministic. So what happens with conflict is you have to worry about this number here. Now, I played something recently that had these kind of numbers. I don't remember what. But this is the iconic game of it. That's how many people can live in an area. Now, if you're in an area and it doesn't matter how many different players are there, if the total number of pieces there is less than or equal to the amount of population that can support, you're all fine. It's cool. But if you're in an area which can't support everyone, and this is a 1, it's impossible to read, well, then you have conflict. And conflict works as follows. Whoever has the least pieces in the area removes a piece. Is there still conflict? Then the next least number removes a piece. If 2 people have the same number, they remove them at the same time. So for example, this situation, both are dead, and oh well, now it's underpopulated. No big deal. Well, I mean, it is for the people involved, but anyway. That's pretty much the story of conflict. There's a little bit of exception to that. Cities, when you siege a city, you have, I'll get to them in a minute. You have to have 8 pieces, I think it is. And, let's see engineering here. Siege warfare? I don't know. I think it's 8 pieces. And the city turns into 6 pieces, and then you hold out a fight there. Alright. Let's, after conflict comes building cities. If you have 6 or more pieces in a space with a city square, you can turn them in and get a city there. Now, you will have had to win any conflict if you have 6 or more. That's just how the numbers boil out, so don't worry about that issue. You can only do this if you have cities remaining. And after cities, then you have to remove surplus population. Now, removing surplus population is a little different from conflict. It's when you've got too many people in an area all by yourself. So this guy has 2 in one area, he'd have to lose 1. And the reason that's after the cities is because, well, you couldn't build the cities if you removed the population first. So you have to kind of cluster your people into a city. By the way, when you want to build a city, if you don't have a little square available, and they come in different flavors, white and black. The white ones are sitting on a floodplain, which can be a problem. If you don't have a city available that you want to use, or if you just want to convert a lot of your people back into stock so that your cities don't revolt later on the next turn, well, you can collect 12 of them in any area and turn them into a city. And that can be kind of interesting. When you siege that city, though, it's still only worth 6, and it's probably destroyed by the siege, so, you know. Okay, well, almost definitely. Let's see what else we got here. Acquire trade cards. So here's why you want the cities. Every city you have on the map is going to give you one of these trade cards. There's 9 stacks of them. For those who are interested, I have the expanded trade cards here. I'm not going to use them in this game. The reason for that is, over the years, I've come to the conclusion that they actually unbalance the game. Now, I'm not convinced the game's balanced. For example, like I said, Asia and Assyria have exactly the same chart here. The same starting position, essentially. I mean, let's say you picked one and they weren't both in the game. Asia and Assyria have the same chart up till here. Now, Asia gets hit with a change first here, and then it has further penalties, an earlier penalty here. So it's got a slightly worse chart. For a positional disadvantage, I cannot conclude that the game was well tested for absolute balance given that. Of course, absolute balance is impossible. It depends on who and what's where. But in every case, in every situation that I look at in the game, Assyria holds every advantage over Asia. If you're playing with neither of them on the board, well, if your pick is for one of the two and neither one's on, here I go with this because I was planning on doing this at the beginning, but whatever. If you pick one of them and the other one's not on the board, well, you want Assyria every time because the chart's a little better. If Assyria is already on the board, Asia is a particularly bad choice because they have a movement penalty against Assyria. They're going to therefore be in, whenever there's conflict, they're at a disadvantage. So it's just a horrible, horrible choice. No one should ever pick Asia, and of course I always see people do it. But the only exception is if Assyria is in the game and you really want it to be Assyria, and you cannot abide by being anything else that's left. Asia's not a ridiculous choice, but it's got, you have to understand that Assyria's got all the advantages on you. And the jump. Okay. So anyway, every city you have on the board gives you a trade card. If you have one city, you get one off the one deck. 2 cities, one off each of these 2 decks. If there's no card in the deck, you don't get it. Some of the cards, let's take a look at them. The cards have a value on them, and they're sort of a set collection situation. As you go up in value, they get, or as you go up in number of cities, they get to be higher values. What's important here is, once you have 9 cities, you get 1 out of each deck. You're not going to pair up from one draw. That's one important thing. Another is the way the value increases. It is the square. No, it's not a square. Yeah, it's the square of the value of the card. No, that can't be right. Let me think what it is. 2 to the, I'm trying to remember how this works. It's the square of the number of cards times the value of the card. So, for example, the square of 1 is 1 times 1 is 1. The square of 2 is 2, or is 4 times 1 is 4. The square of 2 is 4 times 9 is 36, and the square of 3 is 9. 9 times 9 is 81. And you'll see they all progress that way. Some of the decks the decks are of different size. So the biggest collection actually ends up being the 4 card. Some of the cards, though, aren't so good. So there's these red cards here. And very sadly, I seem to be missing my Civil War, which is this card down here. I'm going to use this as my Civil War stand-in. It's okay because it's a red card, so it's not too terrible. I don't know when this happened. Probably last time I played it. Ended up, with someone. I haven't played it not with. Okay, so the volcanic eruption or earthquake, that doesn't sound too good. This isn't a trade card, and this is going to be a calamity, which is going to be something bad that happens to you. Those range up to the 5 deck. Whoa, this feels... Oh, there it is. Cool. Yeah, didn't understand how I could have lost it. Okay. The 5 deck has the Flood, and we'll go over those briefly. But the 6 deck has something a little scarier. It doesn't have a red back. This is something you hold and can trade to other people, causing them a problem. Alright. So anyway, you get this handful of cards, and that's all great and good. And now, you're allowed to trade. Trading is exchanging these cards. You're only allowed to exchange these cards. You can't throw treasury or something like that into this. Makes it tough to make deals. It's hard to get balance in these things. Now, when you make a trade, you can't show each other your cards. And I think there's a penalty for that, but I'll mention that later if it is. I think it involves discarding, but I'm not sure. You have to, what you have to do is you have to give them 3 pieces of information, and only 3 pieces of information. You can't declare, oh, this is a trade, and I'm giving you more information, and I'm bound by it somehow. 3 specific pieces. The number of cards you're trading, the total value of that set of cards, and one and only one commodity in the set. Now, you can cheat a little bit here. So, for example, with this, I could offer you 2 separate trades, and you can take either one. One involving, I'll give you 3 cards worth 4, 5, 6, including ochre, and if you'd rather, I could give you 3 cards worth 6, including papyrus. It's the same deal. The player gets to choose which one they want, and then when we formally make the trade, that's what's announced. A lot of this trading, though, is done in sort of this chaotic exchange type, market where everybody's just walking around chatting with each other. It's important that everybody be kind of aware of what they can and can't do in a trade. They can't say and be bound by, oh yeah, there's an iron and a this. Depending on how you play, you could say that you can make these statements, but you're not bound by them. Usually it's best to just very strictly restrict yourself to what the actual trades are, even if you're allowing negotiation in other cases. But, people want to know, oh, no, there's no disasters in there. Yeah, I'll give you a warning there. I will lie on that. I don't lie in diplomacy or anything else in most games, but I will lie if you start asking me, I don't want that. If you're traded a disaster, one of these brown back things, you must immediately turn it up. This is kind of a hard thing people have to remember. A lot of new players think, oh, I can just keep trading it on. It's like the hot potato. Whoever's stuck with it at the end gets it. Unfortunately, that's not the way it works. The way it works is as soon as you're traded, it gets flipped up on you. All right, I'm going to have to combine videos here. Okay. So obviously what you're trading for is to collect these sets. You're not going to get them naturally yourself at any good rate. But if you find somebody with approximately your same number of cities, you can match up and try to get a sharing of, a situation where each of you has a significant holding of one of your higher valued sets of types of cards. This becomes a little bit more difficult if a couple of people are running ahead in terms of total number of cities with the new trade cards, because these new trade cards are different types. So for example, gems is in the old set. You'd be adding a few die cards to that. So there's like a 50-50 chance that I'll get the correct thing. One thing the new trade cards also add is a little bit more luck to the game. There's very little luck in the basic game. You have these two decks which need to be shuffled, the 1 and 2 cards, because they have multiple sets. But everything else actually goes into the decks deterministically, most especially the calamities. All right, let's move on. After you do your trading, it's time to buy Civ cards. And you're allowed to use points from your sets here. And they don't, I mean, a set can be as little as 1. As well as treasury, which converts into stock. And then there's benefits to buying some of them. So if you already own cloth making or an orange, you have this orange bonus that goes towards all other oranges. Okay? You had to have owned it at the beginning of the turn, though. You also have these bonuses like this, which are specific to specific advances. And then there's also restrictions, such as this, which is required in order to get either one of these. I believe you can buy law and either of these at the same time, though. You don't have the same effect as the bonuses. Each of these trade cards has certain advantages to it. And, well, let's skim through them. We've talked about some of them already. Cloth making, for example. Pottery, if you have grain on the board, if you have grain in your hand, each grain reduces the amount of losses that you take from that calamity. I'm not going to go into too much detail on the calamities. Metalworking, the advantage in battle that it gives, the other guy always removes first, even if you're smaller. Agriculture, if you're alone in an area, you can hold one more person in that area. Engineering, I don't even remember completely what it does. It makes it harder to siege. I think you get 7 pieces. I don't remember. I'd have to look it up. These guys don't really do anything except give you bonuses. Same here. This allows you to sail across the ocean, and again, I'm not sure about the effects of it, but that's okay. Change in taxation we hit, and again, an effect on a disaster. These guys have effects on disasters too. They may not be good, though. Philosophy, for example, does some really kind of screwy things to Civil War that may be good or bad. Again, I don't remember them well enough and don't really want to go through them and waste everybody's time with that. We'll see them when they happen if you're that interested in watching the game and haven't played it before. If you're interested in the game and understanding it, well, and don't really want to watch the playthrough, well, I mean, the basic is the calamities do bad things to the person who draws or is traded them. And some of them can be very bad, to the extent of wiping out, you know, I think 4 cities is probably the heaviest. But Civil War splits the country in half and gives half of it to another player. There's some pretty hefty stuff in there. And it depends on your situation. Some of them can be very light if you're big, but devastating if you're small, and some of them are vice versa. All right. So after you buy your civilization cards, well, you're limited to how many trade cards you can hold. And you can only hold 1 per city, I believe. Which means, if you've been hoarding, you're going to have to throw some of your low-valued stuff if you're trying to build up a big set or something, and you end up, you know, with some excess cards. You're probably going to have to throw stuff away. That's a very bad thing to have happen, in my view, so I try to buy all the time. I seldomly see people discard something. It's usually just a card or 2. At this point, the calamities are resolved. I already kind of talked about them a little bit. I don't want to go into them in too much detail. And then we alter the AST. And remember, this is how you win the game, right? Well, in the newest Stone Age, you go forward. In the Bronze Age and further, you will go forward. This is not including the little barriers. You will go forward so long as you have I believe it's one city. It may be two. This is kind of important, so I think I should talk about it. Jeez. Yeah, you must have at least one city in order to move forward. And if you don't, instead you move back, unless you're in the New Stone Age. Okay. Now, in order to make the branches here, in order to make this first barrier, you have to have two cities. For the second barrier here, it's based on colors. You have to have civilization cards in 3 color groups. That's usually going to be orange, green, and blue, and you probably, if you can, are using a double up card. But you might have pink. Architecture's not too expensive, and it gives you 2 colors, which can be a bonus. In order to reach the late Bronze Age, yeah, that's the 3. In order to reach the early Iron Age, you have to have at least 7 of these cards numerically. Now there's a limit to how many you can hold. I think it's 11. Let me look at that. No, I was wrong. The return X, I bet you that's in the new trade deal. Okay, so no, in the original game you can hold 6 trade cards. That makes it really tough to make a collection, I guess. I'm used to 1 per city, and I bet you that's kicking around. Now, these may not have all the rules. Yeah, these do not have the rules, so I probably pulled that rule out of the general, which actually has the rules in it then. But anyway, yeah, you're allowed only 6 trade cards no matter what in this set. I wonder if I'm just misremembering something from long, long ago. But it seems to me that it was one trade card per city. All right. Yeah, I don't remember. There's a limit to how many cards you can hold, but I'm having trouble finding it here. And that's a big difference, by the way, with A-Civ. A-Civ, you're allowed to hold everything, I think. I'm not finding it. Lots of rules on the credits. $11 card limit, yeah. Alright, so the 11 card limit is important because, we'll see here, when you hit the late Iron Age, you have to have 1,000 points in civilization cards alone. Now that means if you buy all the cheap ones, I think it's actually possible that you can't make it into here. I'm not sure. I seem to remember having found that if you do things absolutely as cheaply as you can to get that 7 card limit, you won't make it. But what it does definitely cause a problem is once you hit these little boxes here, this is including trade cards and stock, however, you have to have this much buying power, including bought power, okay? So your Civ cards count for you. You can add in trade cards and stock, and you just have to show that you have that in order to enter that line. And then for the final one, I believe you still have to be able to show this to enter it, but I'm not positive about that. Okay. And you win if you make it there. Oh, wait, what if multiple people make it? I mean, we're all going at the same speed, and this is the problem with the new trade cards. Everybody makes it. Everybody makes it, except for 2 people. Egypt and Babylon have a real hard time making it through the first 2 barriers without stopping, no matter what the game, even in the advanced trade version. They just don't have enough time to make that 3-color barrier usually. They can make the 2 cities very easily. If they take a pause on the 2 cities, they're often stronger going into 3-color barrier, but That's a terrible move if you want to make, if everybody else is going to just run through all the zones pretty clearly. Now, someone may fall behind, but for the most part, almost everyone goes forward. So then what does it come down to? Well, it comes down to whoever has the most points total. Well, gee, the people aiming for the most aren't really penalized so much unless they somehow fail. They're more likely to get the win. And that's why, with the advanced trade cards, I think countries like Assyria and Babylon, well, Babylon not so much because they do have trouble getting that third one. Assyria is definitely a bonus. And then some of these others are kind of bonus. It's really just a matter of it no longer really matters. Nothing stops you. It's too easy to get trades going if enough people are doing well. Now, if people are horrendously violent in this game, and I've never seen that happen, I'm sure that the chart could get really weird. But it's not in your favor to be violent in this game. It's in your best interests to let them be violent. There's not much to gain by violence. The good thing is to maintain good enough relationships that you can make your trades, except when you lose territory to someone else. That happens. Maybe you'll take it back or whatever, but you don't want to go all out in a war, because warfare is going to ruin your position on the board, and the guy who isn't fighting is going to keep going ahead and moving ahead. All right. So, that's given a lot about why I don't use those trade cards. They add randomness, and I mean, I was excited as hell when I first saw them, and I played with them always for a while, like quite a long time, 10 years maybe, and then, you know, I realized, yeah, I always win this game. I'm always Assyria, or, you know, one of these other powers. And I was never seeing Egypt, Babylon. I was never seeing them win anymore. They couldn't hold up. Crete. And, you know, I started thinking back to the games that I first played long, long ago. And I really, I'm convinced that this is the case. Now, I haven't played enough games again with the old cards to realize. But there does definitely seem to be a lot more imbalance with the new cards. There's a lot more chance. So the old cards may make the game long, or the new cards, the old cards may make the game a little longer, because not everybody advances every turn. All right, we'll get started, and I'll finish my setup, and then, well, you'll get to see the play if you want to watch around for that. Eventually, we'll come back to the review.